everyone. Happy to be back with you with another episode of The Point of View. And it's been a while. Well, it hasn't been a while, but I'm excited because today we're having a special guest with us. But it's Obelle, as you guys already know. And GV is not with me right now because he punked out and he's behind the cameras, but that's all right. We're going to make it work. And this episode is going to be a little bit emotional, but also very educating. And we want that our platform is not just to talk about things, but how can we move forward and how can we process what's going on in our lives and make changes that will help better our lives. And before we start, as you guys know, I always like to have a quote of the week. But before we get to it, we understand that right now we are in difficult times. Not only we have Corona as the pandemic, but we have a racial pandemic going on as well. And as for you guys have seen the news, you've seen everything that's going on if you're keeping up. As for me, I try to avoid it, but because I'm doing this podcast, I had to kind of go back and kind of inform myself and kind of indulge in what was going on. That way I can be more aware. But you guys can see that there has been a death. The death of Floyd, which was by a police officer and due to racism. And we want to address that today. And right outside of us, people are protesting, which is very interesting that we're going to have this talk. But today we have a former police officer of 25 years. His name is Antonio Champion. And he's going to give us a little bit more about why he became a police officer and about what's going on and where it all started. And I'm excited to introduce him. But before I allow him to speak, I know I tend to talk a lot. I have a quote of the week, and it is, "A riot is the language of the unheard," quote by Martin Luther King, which is very interesting because he doesn't condone any violence, but he himself said it. Now, let us introduce Antonio. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I am so grateful that you've allowed yourself to be here so that way you can give us a little bit about you, give us a little bit more information about this subject when it comes to racism and systemic racism specifically. But before we start, can you tell us a little bit more about what you think about the quote?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the quote. It was one I was going to bring, so I'm glad to see that you brought it.
Wow.
Because I didn't.
Great minds think alike.
So it is, well, I agree with it 100%. And although there are people who would like to see us, and I say us, I mean I identify with the protesters. There are many people who would like to see us do it quietly. But I would say for 400 years, perhaps we've done it too quietly.
Wow.
And sometimes the only way that people will hear you is when you get their attention. And sometimes the only way to get their attention is by taking something from them or by taking away their sense of security, their sense of normalcy. And certainly the pandemic has done some of that work for us. But this has added to that.
Right.
And I think people are listening differently because of it.
Wow. Thank you for putting that for us. But now, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and why did you join the law enforcement?
Well, thanks for having me here. This is a real pleasure and an honor. It started way back. I'm going to assume you weren't born in the 1970s.
Well, yeah, hopefully not.
So it started back then. And I lived in the hood.
Wow.
And I'm going to not mention specific places and departments because there may be times where I talk about police departments. I work for 3 different police departments.
Wow.
And I don't want to necessarily get people's attention regarding any particular department.
Okay.
And there are reasons why.
Okay.
Legal reasons in some cases.
Yes.
However, growing up in the hood, you don't have many opportunities to be a part of activities outside of the home that are safe. My mom said, "Hey, I understand there are some police officers in the community. They have some program down the street." She had no idea really much more. She had no more information other than that. I didn't have any more information. So I just decided to walk down the street and see what was going on. And there I found a Police Explorer program. It's a Boy Scout program. And there were police officers who were not responding to a call for service, but police officers who were there to have this program run successfully for youth in the community. This was in the 1970s, like I said, and it was a time when we had more of those types of programs where we understood as a community, as a country, that we needed to do that type of work. It was also the first time, I have to be honest with you, that I saw professional Black and brown men
Wow.
in the community doing positive things like this.
Okay.
And I had never thought about police work before that time. I was 14 at the time. And I fell in.
Wow.
And I was a police explorer for several years.
Okay.
Then I ended up interning at the police department for my last year of high school. And I became a police cadet. Spent 20 years with that department.
Wow. 20 years.
Yes.
Wow. So to continue with that's a long time. So you've basically heard and seen it all. In my opinion, I would think that you've seen different sides to policing. And can you tell us a little bit more about how, the process is for you to become a police officer? What was the process like?
And let me just reel it back a little bit.
Okay.
I saw in my community problems that weren't being addressed.
Okay.
And I saw policing as a way to help solve those problems. It was a helping profession the way I looked at it.
Okay.
It wasn't about arresting people and car chases and all that stuff you see on television. Getting into the police department takes about a year. There's a process of doing an extensive background check, a polygraph, talking to all your neighbors, former and present girlfriends and boyfriends and so on, and an interview board or two. And I got in as a police cadet at 18, and that was good for me because there were fewer people applying.
Oh.
So the odds of me with being in the Police Explorer program and actually spending literally hundreds of hours in police cars, going to calls for service, I thought I had a leg up on some of these other candidates.
Right.
And so I knew, and plus spending the last year of my high school experience at the police department, working inside the police department. So I actually got references from actual, sergeants and other civilians that worked in the police department.
Wow.
So the process for me was not that difficult to get in.
Okay.
But it was once I got in that things were quite challenging.
Wow. And and I would definitely want to address some of the challenges. I would definitely want you to address some of those challenges. But before, can you tell us a little bit about the training process for, just about any police officers? How does that look like?
It varies by department. So there are literally tens of thousands of different police departments, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Law enforcement agencies in the United States.
Wow.
So if you are a federal officer, your training is totally different than if you're a municipal officer or someone who's hired by the city or town to police. So some people will go to a police academy for just weeks, and some others will go to a police academy for months.
Wow. So it's not a set process.
No.
Wow.
And you will hear often people talk about, well, this is a training issue in terms of the use of force and so on.
Right.
Yeah, some of it may be, but as hopefully we'll get into, some of it really is about something else.
Okay. All right. And so thank you for telling me that, because I really thought there was like a specific number for just, about all police departments. But now that you're saying it, it's enlightening us that there's different not every police department has the same training process, which is very interesting. Now, you're no longer a police officer. And now I would like to dive into why did you make that initiative to no longer partake in that?
So after 20 years with that department, it saddens me to say that I actually had dislike and hatred for law enforcement.
Wow.
And I was really happy to get out after 20 years. Vowed I would never do it again. And that was in a department that was not in Texas.
Yeah.
Moved to the state of Texas after that.
Wow.
And I thought I was done with law enforcement
Right.
till I got a change in, I got divorced.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to look at going back to my day job, which I did for 5 years here in Texas.
Wow. And so to dive right into it, do you believe that it has something with corruption? Do you feel like it is because the system is so corrupted? And can you tell us why, if that's the thought behind?
How much time do you have?
Well, we can make this a part 2 because we need our audience to kind of hear the real and raw thing. And that is why you're here. And I believe you're going to deliver that. So yeah, take as much as you need. And if we have to kind of go back into part 2, then we'll do just that.
Okay. Well, yes, there is corruption. And I've listened to a lot of stories over the last week and a half from different people in regards to police shootings. And I hear people often say, well, the black and brown officers, why don't they do something about this? Why don't they say something? Why don't they try to stop it when it happens? Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's actually worse than people are seeing on television.
Wow.
The problems are worse.
Wow.
And the reason why I can't even talk about some things is still, after all these years, I have to be concerned about my own safety. And so, police officers, like any other group, can violate the law, can break the law.
Right.
And there are situations that I am aware of. Some of them have been brought out.
Okay.
Some of them have not.
Okay.
So I work.
Do you mind elaborating into
I'll
are
talk
those?
about some of the things that have made the news.
Yes, go ahead. It's fine.
So I'll tell you a personal situation with a young man who I worked with and actually spent time recreationally with. I mean, we went to clubs together.
Okay.
And been over his house, been over my house. We spent a lot of time together. He was later indicted as a police officer for taking his service weapon, his gun, and putting it in the mouth of prostitutes, forcing them to have sex with him while he was on duty.
Wow.
And he ended up doing federal time. I think he got 5 years for that. But that's just one example of corruption.
Right.
I didn't retire from that police department that I spent 20 years at.
Right.
With any type of rank like sergeant or lieutenant, because when I took a promotional exam, I learned how corrupt the process was for promoting officers.
Wow.
So I took this written exam, and then there was an oral exam. And I don't want to go into too much detail because it would take up more time than perhaps we would want to use for this. But it was clear that the system was rigged. It was corrupt.
Wow.
To the point where they even had to have someone come in and independently give the exam under certain conditions.
Wow.
Because there had been past corruption. And so there are things that happen that never make the news, right? So let me back up a little bit. When I was hired at this particular department, which I can say was in the Northeast part of the country.
Okay.
And I wanted to mention that because we often think about northern states or northeastern states as being different than southern states when it comes to race relations.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm here to say that they are not.
Very important to say. Yeah.
So this particular department I got hired at, they were under what they call a consent decree.
Consent decree.
From the federal government because of hiring practices. So they deliberately did not hire women and black and brown police officers. Not because they weren't qualified,
Hmm.
but they just didn't want them.
Wow.
And so these practices were found out, and the feds got involved, and a consent decree was an agreement that said the city will hire more Black and brown people, period, or else.
Mhm.
There were other things that were going to kick in if they did not do that.
Right.
So here I come into this department several years after that consent decree. You can imagine the welcome I got, right? Or people who
Right.
looked like me.
Right.
So it was not quite a red carpet kind of experience at all.
Wow. That is that. I'm lost of words right now, but that explains some of the challenges to recruiting minorities within, as a police officer. Now, give us a little bit more detail on how do you kind of like maneuver those challenges when you're inside? Like, how do you kind of fight against the system? Are you able to, or are there repercussions to fighting against that kind of corruption within?
There's a price to pay.
Okay. And that's that's where we're getting to.
So,
and have people tried to fight against that? Or police officers?
I tried when I was a police cadet, then I became a full police officer.
Mm.
As a police cadet, I realized that there were problems.
Okay.
And I spoke up about those problems, and they kind of knew I was one of those kinds of folks. Troublemaker.
Wow.
Right?
That's what they call them.
Yes. And so when the list came out for the next academy that I was eligible for,
Mm-hmm.
my name wasn't on the list for some reason. It wasn't because of job performance.
Right.
So I had to go and inquire and say to management, hey, what's the deal? There was no explanation.
Okay.
They eventually put my name on the list for that next police academy. When I became a police officer, it was apparent to me that I did not quite fit in like white officers. I didn't have the same privileges. I didn't have the same rights, same advantages. There were Hispanic and Black organizations that had already been formed.
Okay.
Or separately for Black officers and separately for Hispanic officers. So being that I am actually Puerto Rican and Black,
Wow.
I said, you know what? This is really something where we need to have both groups of people working together.
Right.
So I actually formed a Black and Hispanic Police Officers Association as a young officer.
Okay.
To start to address some of the problems that we officers of color had working at the police department.
Right. Wow, that's pretty interesting. But thank you for actually telling us that, because I didn't even know that you actually got so involved. But so after 20 years of doing that experience, and now we can see how the media is finally, we've been protesting quietly, and some can say too, like you said earlier, too silently. And we even see now police officers actually protesting. And how do you feel about that movement? Because now some people are saying, oh, it's fake. It's, it's not real. It's something behind it. It's, there's a lot of people saying different things about that. Like, what are your point of views?
I almost want to ask you what your opinion is on that. But you asked me the question, and you're supposed to be asking the question, so I'll answer it, okay?
No problem.
So I believe that what we're seeing is the beginning of a movement, a new civil rights movement. As a phrase that was coined maybe a year or so ago, I think more people are woke now.
Yeah.
So when we talk about what solutions look like, it will not be because a police officer takes a knee. That is not a solution.
Okay.
That, to me, is more about trying to quell or trying to de-escalate a situation.
Wow.
But I can tell you, because I know policing. I know the culture of policing.
Mm-hmm.
I know the history of policing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's going to take much more than taking a knee. Or with the Dallas police chief.
Right.
And I think she was genuine
Mm-hmm.
when she wept on TV during, I think, one of the protests
Mm-hmm.
recently, in the last day or two. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was genuine, but that's not going to be enough.
Right. Right.
She's a black woman,
Mm-hmm.
by the way. That's not going to be enough.
Okay.
And we can talk about what may be enough, what we need to do, maybe a little later.
Yeah, and I actually was gonna dive in right into that, and I was gonna ask you: do you feel like the racial makeup of the community's police department should be similar to the racial makeup that it serves, the community that it serves, do you feel like that's necessary?
So I'm going to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
But what comes to mind first is, have we identified the problem?
Okay.
So we know someone died.
Mm-hmm.
We know there's police brutality.
Right.
We know there's harassment by the police against black and brown people more than other groups.
Right.
What's the problem? So I always like to kind of go back when, there's a political side to me, and I'll talk about that in a while. But after the 2016 election of our current president or resident of the White House, I had to take a deep dive into what the hell is going on.
Mm.
And I tell you, as old as I am, and if I was around in the 70s, that means I'm old.
It doesn't appear in his face because we know black don't crack.
There you go. I hope mine does what
No.
it's supposed to do then.
Yeah.
I learned a lot in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was troubling. And I read a lot. And I listened to people who are a lot smarter than I am, who know a lot more about this stuff than I do. And, I came to the conclusion. Well, let me say this. We had the so-called Tea Party.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that. That was when Obama was elected president.
Right.
And people actually went to the White House with long guns and so on, which I had no idea that the Tea Party needed guns to talk about the things that they wanted to talk about,
Right.
being the Tea Party, which was taxation and all these other things. It's kind of based on the old Boston Tea Party from centuries ago, literally. But anyway, after Obama left office, there's really consensus that Tea Party was formed as kind of like a backlash to Obama getting elected, where certain people in this country said, what the hell? And they responded to seeing this person look like Obama in the White House. That meant something to them differently than it meant to you and me.
Mm.
And then, in my opinion, and I think there's consensus on this, the election of Trump really is a backlash as well to Obama being elected.
Wow.
It's a reaction. And there's always been a push and pull in this country when it comes to race.
Right.
And so I forgot your question now because I went off on this rant.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Be yourself. And I was saying that, do you feel like that should, our police officers should kind of mirror the community that they serve in a way? Like if, they're serving a black community, there should be a lot more black police officers sent out. And do you feel like maybe there's some type of, not racism against them going there, or just the recruiting of black police officers going out to serve their own communities?
So is your question really, can white officers police black communities? Is that your real question?
It's a good way to put it. It's a good way to put it. Yes, black police officers serving the black community, we're not to say that will change anything, but do you feel like that's necessary? Because if you look at racism, I want you to talk a little bit more on why policing started, to kind of give us why that, possibly would be something that would be considered when it comes to serving the black community.
So let me say this about policing.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, and I did my municipal policing during the crack epidemic, right? So 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So just to give you a time frame in which to put this into context, right? I was not looking like me. someone who looks like me was not allowed to work in predominantly white communities for a permanent assignment.
Okay.
So in other words, those communities did not want someone looks like me telling them what to do. And the police department responded to that by not putting too many officers that look like me, give them permanent assignments
Right.
in predominantly white communities. However, in predominantly black and brown communities, it was fine to have as many white officers as you wanted to have.
Right.
So I think there's a history here that we have to be aware of policing itself to answer that question. So policing, the way we see it today, the way we understand policing today, organized the way it is, started around the mid-1800s, New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston, Massachusetts. It was at the time when those cities were looking different because of immigrant groups who needed to be kind of kept in line differently than the way we had policed communities before, with constables, which replaced a watch system way back when. So it needed to be more organized to respond to the many immigrant groups coming into those cities. So that's the mid-1800s. We know what happened in 1861, which was the start of the Civil War, which ended in 1865. So I'm not going to be too much of a geek on this, but just to kind of, again, you got to understand the context in which things are happening.
Right.
So when that Civil War ended in 1865, we found that many officers came from places that thought we needed to continue to have a certain social order in this country. So it is well documented, for instance, that a number of people who belong to the Klan were also police officers. And I can tell you this, I've worked with people who I thought were still in the Klan in the times that I policed in my 25 years.
Wow.
Because of the way that they think, the way that they view people who look like me. And so the question is, should we have more diversity? We can have more diversity, but that won't fix the problem still.
The problem.
Because policing itself, the way we police is the problem. So the entire structure of policing is the problem.
Okay.
And so we talk about a few bad apples, for instance, right? You hear that all the time. Oh, if it wasn't for those few bad apples, this would all be better.
Yeah.
No. If it was that easy, we would have done this a long time ago.
Wow.
It is the culture of policing. So I'll give you an example. And this is one of the reasons why I won't mention the department that I worked for, did my municipal policing. When we chase someone, whether they resisted or not, they were going to be taught a lesson.
Wow.
We used to call it, they got split, which means that you actually use your baton to slice a piece of their skin and split their skin, right? So if you ran from the police, and people know this already, but I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah.
When you ran from the police, or when you were in a car and we caught you, you were going to get a beat down, whether you resisted arrest or not. And so, it was kind of like a pile-on effect. Whoever showed up for that chase got to get some licks in too.
Yep.
So there's evidence of this, right? During Rodney King, where we had it on tape.
Right. A lot of them on tape now.
And if you remember that, and for those of you who may be listening, if you don't remember, you can go and get the video of this and just see how the officers responding to catching up to that person that they had chased. So this is in California, right? And I'm on the other coast.
Yeah.
So that tells you something about policing. It doesn't tell you something about specific departments. It tells you about policing.
Wow.
You were going to get tuned up. It was going to happen.
This is so sad.
Don't take it from me. Turn on the news tonight and watch the video of the officers when they're dealing with protesters who are not resisting and in some cases walking away from them.
Right.
And they're using their baton or pepper spray or pushing them down in case of a 75-year-old man, and find that this is perfectly okay behavior.
And to kind of make this a little bit more understandable, they're immune to this because this is something that's been happening for so long that now it's just second nature. This is how they deal with it. And like you said, this is just policing, policing that we're getting.
Yes. And you're taught this.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, you are taught this.
So when you are a new officer, you go out and you do what veteran officers do.
Right.
What is the culture of the department? So you're not going to be standing there with your hands in your pocket while other police officers are engaged in trying to subdue someone using force, and you're standing in the background.
Right. Because then you look like the soft one, right?
Well, you look like maybe you're not part of the team.
Wow.
And so I'll give you an example of how that can impact you. I'm trying to make sure I don't give out too much information here.
No, give out the information. We need it.
The academy with an assistant chief's son.
Uh-huh.
I went to a call with him once we graduated the academy, where for something really, really simple, he used force that I thought was excessive.
Okay.
To the point where the person that he used this force against, and this was a white person he used the force against.
Okay.
They actually wanted to seek medical attention after. So when I heard that, I contacted my supervisor. Hey, Sarge, you may want to know that this guy who's going to the hospital, that was a little excessive, the thing that happened to him.
Right.
So I wrote a report, an honest report about what happened, because I was there. I was his backup.
Right.
He ended up getting 90 days suspension without pay. He should have been terminated for what he had done.
Right.
And he went around after that and told people I was a rat. And if you're a rat in policing, that means you can't be trusted.
Yep.
And you do a lot of things in policing where you need everyone to be on the same page. If you're considered a rat, obviously that's not good, because if you need a backup or you have to call 911 when you're working,
got your back.
That's your backup.
Yeah.
And that person can take their time or not get there at all. And has that happened in policing? Of course it has.
So in other words, you're in a position where if you stand up for what is right and you're doing the right thing, you're not in a position to do your job effectively because your team will not support it. And to them, you're basically against what they're doing.
That's right.
This is so sad. So sad. And I'm in awe right now of the honesty, and thank you for that. But we have to move forward. We have to kind of create some type of support system and help our community be better and try to pass, all that is going on. And we're going to try our best to do it the way that we feel like will help us. And I know you mentioned that you are in politics, and do you feel like that more Black people should be, part of politics or should join politics because of that? Or do you feel like that will somewhat help us?
Well, I kind of evolved into getting into politics at the level that I'm involved now.
Okay.
So when I policed the city, during and afterwards, I felt like I was almost like a prison guard, where my job was really to keep these folks contained, right? Don't let them hurt good people. And when we look at communities, the way they're set up, right? If you go into communities where you don't belong, you're more likely to get stopped by police who will ask you, what are you doing here?
Right.
That's part of that containment. You stay in your box and your place. We're still concerned about who gets hurt, but it won't be the good people that get hurt, right? It'll be the people who are probably doing something wrong anyway, in a wrong place, or there's something about them that probably led to them being the victim of a crime, right? Blaming the victim.
Right.
So I also saw that when you have policy, when it doesn't work, police officers end up dealing with that failed policy. Economically, education, employment. And I said, I save people's lives. I'm sure I help people, but it wasn't enough because the problem was too big for me to touch people individually. That was just not going to get it done. So I needed a way to impact people's lives, many more people's lives differently and more long term.
Right.
And I understood that politics is where people go to work on problems and issues and to come up with policy that impact everyone. And when you talk about politics, people tend to roll their eyes like, oh, well, I'm not involved in politics.
I used to be one of those, but I'm...
Yes, I vote, I try to vote.
Right.
And so on. Like it's like a hobby or this kind of thing you do.
Yeah.
But we're all involved in politics, even if we don't vote.
Wow.
Right?
That's a sad truth. Yeah.
When we don't vote,
hard truth.
That's a way of sending really a message, but also it gives your vote to someone else, right? Who will vote in people into office, who will think about policy maybe differently than you would.
Yeah.
And it may not be in your best interest. So if it's okay with your neighbor down the street that you don't know, or somebody in another community voting people into office to determine the type of education that your kids get, or the type of police officer that polices your community, if it's okay that somebody else makes that decision for you, then not voting, I guess, works for you.
Definitely.
But if you are at all concerned about whether or not you have people in place who represent you and your interests and your needs, then you really want to be more involved in politics, more involved than even just voting. So I am a precinct chair in Dallas County.
Okay.
So I have a geographic area that I'm responsible for organizing. But my goal really is to organize South Dallas County.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that we are not as organized as a group as we need to be. And so we need to get more people registered to vote.
Okay.
We need to have more people involved, not only in the political process, but involved in other groups like Black Lives Matter, like whatever group you want to be involved in, right? Because it's not just political people that are responsible for solving problems. As a matter of fact, I would say make sure that whoever you elect into office, you know a little bit about what they're doing. Not just say, okay, I elected them in office, now I can go back to Netflix.
Right, exactly. And do you feel like there is a specific reason why, specifically in our community, you don't find people who wants to involve themselves into politics? Do you think there's a specific reason for that, where I don't need to vote, my vote don't count? And I mean, I think personally it's a lack of education, but do you want to add to that, or do you feel like it's something deeper?
I think, unfortunately, historically, if you just turn on the news this evening, you will see that things have not worked very well for communities of color. And so it's hard to say to someone, go and vote when you don't see the impact of that vote. You don't see how it helps you. And I have people tell me this.
Yeah.
I don't see the change in my community. I don't see the change when people get elected who look like me.
Yeah.
And I get that. Yeah. But there are things that happen. There are things that change that you may not be aware of. But what I would say is this. Well, let me back up a little bit. I was in a meeting in February with a city councilwoman and a Texas House of Representative member. Okay, and this city council member, and I won't say the city that she represented, but it was here in Texas, obviously. she said, well, what we need to do when it comes to active shooters at schools is to put metal detectors in all the schools. That's all we have to do. And that will solve the problem of active shooters in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And with my background, I had to give a little feedback and pushback.
Right.
And say, no, there's much more to it. So sometimes we elect people who, I mean, you could be elected to office, right? You don't know everything about healthcare, about policing, about everything that you're going to vote on, right? So it's going to take other people to help educate you as the elected official
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that you are doing the right thing based on the real needs of that community.
That's right. Definitely. Wow. We are covering so much in just so little, but I definitely think that we should come back and sit down and talk about how this impacted us mentally and how we can, move forward. But before we end, and I want to thank you for being as transparent as you can and telling us the truth about policing. I want to give us a challenge of the week. With our viewers, we tend to do the challenge of the week, which is telling someone to actively go out there and do something that will help their situation, or in this case, our situation when it comes to racism in America, and how as Black people we can move forward and what is the proper way to do it. And I know that everybody copes differently and everybody, see life in a different, light. So what is the best way, what you would advise for us to kind of move forward?
I'm amazed that more people of color don't know as much about racism. They don't understand it when they see it.
Mm.
So when they look at an education system, they don't understand the racism part of that. When they look at communities, they don't see the racism.
Mm.
So the first thing I think people need to do is not take my word for it, but to go out today and start to do the deep dive I did more of after this president got elected in 2016. So there's a lot of information out there.
Mm-hmm.
I like to start from the beginning.
Okay.
And so the beginning for us was in 1619. When I mean us, I mean people of African descent.
Right.
In this country. So 400 years ago, last August, was when 20 or so Africans were brought to this continent to start slavery in this country. There's a great piece I would like to share.
Yes, I
that
saw
came
you
out
have
in the
the
New York
books.
Times. If you like, you can hold it.
Yes, I'll do it. I'll hold it. I'll do you the honor.
And this was done by Nicole Hannah Jones. It was the first time that I'm aware of in this country's history that we started to tell the story of what happened in the very beginning, August 1619. You can get a copy of this by going online and ordering it. I understand there may be a PDF you can read online. I recommend that everyone listening to this gets a copy of this or reads this, because this is about how things started. It's the foundation of what we're dealing with today. We have to understand the foundation. So I would strongly recommend that people do that. The second thing, and we're going to skip 250 years. So I'm going to give people a chance to not discover everything, but discover the beginning and then what happened in 1865 when slavery ended. So there's a great piece on PBS.
Okay.
That was done by Henry Louis Gates Jr.
Okay. I can also show that.
I don't have that. I have this, which is a different.
Okay.
And he is, if you recall, there was a beer summit when Obama was president because a white police officer arrested this Harvard professor on his porch for basically being disrespectful to a white officer if you look like Henry Louis Gates Jr. does.
Wow.
So Obama invited them both for a so-called beer summit to the White House to sit down and discuss what had happened. But he did about a 4-hour documentary on the Reconstruction period, which is about 12 years. It's about what happened when 4 million formerly enslaved people were freed.
Wow.
What happened to them? And again, it's not about what happened to them back in 1865.
Yes.
It's more about what we're still dealing with
Dealing
today.
with, yep.
So if you go online, I think you can watch that for free.
Okay.
PBS has that. And again, it's simply titled Reconstruction.
Okay.
The last thing I want to leave people with is an author that I really like, talks about in a June 2014 article of The Atlantic magazine about reparations.
Okay.
And so I would just say that people should go and Ta-Nehisi Coates is his name. I've read a couple of his books. However, if you can start with getting the case for reparations in The Atlantic in that June 2014 issue, and if I'm able to come back on again, I'll tell you about a couple of books that I like.
You would definitely come back on.
Because I kind of feel like we're just scratching the surface, actually.
Yes,
There's a lot more that we can talk about.
Definitely.
But this will give people an opportunity to start.
Okay.
To start your own discovery for yourself and understanding the true history of this country.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much, Antonio. You don't understand how much this means to me for you to come here and kind of dissect a little bit of what policing is and what we're dealing with right now. And guys, just if you're continued to watch with us and listening with us every other week, we thank you for that, and go ahead and subscribe. Make sure you like and share this video. When you're done listening, make sure you share it with a friend so that they can also be educated. And we also want to thank Antonio Champion again for being with us. We'll put your information for where people to find you if you would like that, or you can tell them where they can find you.
Well, we'll put it out there.
Okay, we'll put it out there. Thank you so much. You are listening to The Point of View podcast. Until next time.